The world is in turmoil.
The world is in tremendous danger. We're in danger of possibly a World War III.
Everywhere you look, tensions are escalating and conflict is rising.
I think everybody has to be very worried, right? Because if you weren't worried, that's when disaster is going to strike.
And you can't help but wonder, are we now on the brink of World War III? Sky News Digital Originals presents The Brink of World War III. We're in a precarious place right now. Turmoil continues in the Middle East, with the Israel war threatening to expand to other regions. Iran-backed militants attacking US forces met with swift retaliation. And all of this on the backdrop of the threat of China. The question is, how worried should we be?
You know, the likelihood is in the hands of many different people because it can be accelerated or decelerated. Think of the world as a big forest, and there's a couple of big fires going on. And so, you know, the wind can blow the fire in a certain direction. You can put out some of the fires, but what you also have is in this case is a lot of arsonists, right? So there are people intent on trying to start more fires around the world, and that's what is the danger right now with so much fire burning. I think everybody has to be very worried, right? Because if you weren't worried, that's when disaster is going to strike. So in some respects, there's a land war in Europe, right? Land wars in Europe never end well for the global, you know, for everybody in the world. There's, you know, the potential for all of the Middle East to be at war. What war in the Middle East will not stay in the Middle East because, right, energy still for most of the world comes out of there. So you have two regions of the world where they are at war. The Africa, you've had several coups, right? So the Russians, the Chinese are overthrowing democratically elected government. And now you have the Venezuelan army moving on its neighbors in South America. So it's hard to, you know, if you sat back and said, nah, don't worry about it, right? Everything will work its way out. I think you have to, right, the old saying, right, in order to deter war, you have to prepare for war. And so, you know, I'm very worried, right, because again, arsonists in this world who want the world to tip into chaos are out there, and they can take advantage of this very easily. And we're relying in some respects on them not doing that. And that's not a good strategy when you rely on your adversaries to not do something bad.
The world is in a fragile position. The US is close to being on the brink of war with Iran. Recently, President Joe Biden launched an attack on the terrorist group that Iran supplies after a drone attack on a US base in Jordan killed 3 servicemen. This dramatic escalation in Iran tensions has many people wondering, what could Iran be planning to do next?
I would say that Iran is not doing more. They've been doing what they've been doing for the last 40 years, right? So their desire is to create chaos, and they benefit from the Middle East, to take our metaphor, burning. So their desire is to keep all of these tensions up and to keep people, you know, shooting at each other and dying. And so what the United States needs to do is to figure out, how do you deter Iran? And we've seen different strategies from different administrations over the past 45 years, and frankly, none of them have really worked well to date. One of the strategies is to, you know, be with the, you know, align yourself with the Saudis and get everybody against Iran. This administration has chosen to try to you know, do a deal with Iran, and so we'll see what happens here. But it's hard to tell what Iran really thinks they're going to get out of this.
I don't believe Iran wants a hot war with the United States. I believe that Iran wants to use people to kill Israelis, to kill Americans, and see how far it can go. Thus far, it has been able to go pretty far, and there was a great Wall Street Journal editorial on this, that there is a sense that the American president is much more interested in avoiding conflict with Iran than in fighting back against Iran. So I don't predict a violent war with Iran. However, it is accurate to say that there is a world war now, and there has been for quite a while, between the West and those who hate the West. Iran hates the West. The Islamist world hates the West. Not every Muslim, the Islamist world as opposed to the Islamic world. And the people like Hamas hate the West. Israel is attacked for being an outpost of Western civilization in the Middle East. It's fascinating that that is an attack. One would think that that would be praise, since Western civilization has been the most decent civilization ever created in human history. But it is used as an attack by those who hate the West, the left, not liberals, the left, and the Islamists. And they are in alliance against Israel and the United States.
The U.S.'s role is to keep the fires from connecting with each other to become bigger fires, and to keep the arsonists from starting more little fires. And so, you talk about what's going on in Yemen, right? The goal there is to try to convince the terrorists down there from shooting their missiles out into the sea, disrupting world shipping, but more importantly, also not opening up a third front in the war up in Israel and Palestine.
We did see a few Kataib Hezbollah, which is another Iranian Shia proxy group in Iraq, get some of its senior leaders killed. That's always a good thing, right? Happy to kill terrorists any day. But the crucial question is, did the administration attack anything of value, anything of emotional, strategic, or sensitive value to the Iranian regime? See, the Iranian regime has terror proxies throughout the Middle East because they are expendable. So if you kill a few Kataib Hezbollah or a few Hamas or a few Houthi leaders, do the Iranians really care? No, not really. That's why they're proxy groups. They find those people utterly expendable. And so the question remains, what, similar to the Soleimani strike that Mike Pompeo and Trump pursued in the last administration, what are we taking off of the table that is, again, of strategic, emotional, sensitive, important value to the Iranians? That has not happened yet.
Well, I think the Biden administration got themselves into a lot of trouble early on with the failed withdrawal from Afghanistan. And so I think what that did, and I wrote about it back then, is it allowed people to think that they could take a strategic opportunity and turn it against the administration. And so the Russians took advantage of that. The Iranians are taking advantage of that. What it seems like the administration has told the world is, like, we fear escalation more than they fear escalation. And so that's a challenge when others believe that they can escalate and it won't be met but with the full force of the United States. And so I think that's one of the challenges now, is that people believe that the Biden administration is looking to back down and find a way out, that they can keep turning up the heat and putting the pressure on them.
I think that there's so much that people look at with respect to our failed withdrawal from Afghanistan as a critical moment where the U.S. and this particular administration was judged, saying if we can't do that right, if we didn't handle that in the way that we handled that, spoke volumes to how we saw additional threats and our policy and our posture going forward. So much of what's happened, a lot of academics here, a lot of lawmakers have used that as the jumping off point and saying, because that was such a failure, that other countries, other enemies and adversaries looked at that as an opportunity to say, if they're that feckless in that manner, what else won't they do? And you can see the idea that the Houthis, obviously backed by Iran, are willing to take these provocative measures, literally put a drone over U.S. interest and fire at us, wondering whether or not we would retaliate.
Look, the world is on fire. The world is in trouble. We got all kinds of conflict going on in the Middle East. We got all kinds of conflict going on in Africa and on the Horn of Africa. I mean, we need people who are completely focused. So if your Secretary of Defense is ill and your president is having problems, and I got to tell you, Pete, when I heard the special, the independent counsel's conclusion, his finding on President Biden's mishandling of documents, I almost fell off the chair. What he said was, guilty but asleep. He's just not there. He's just not there. And 86% of people surveyed today by America's ABC found out the president was too old. And now we know why he's sort of been in hiding from the public. Look, he's just past it. And of course, we all saw that miserable press conference he had. And as Karl Rove says, you know, you can't unhear what you heard. And that was just a terrible performance.
When Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, it brought a significant shift in the global way of life after a prolonged peacetime in Europe. For the first time since World War II, there was a war in Europe. The war in Ukraine is having significant repercussions politically around the world, with many countries throwing large amounts of funding to support Ukraine.
It would make a big difference for Ukraine. It would allow them the resources in order to stay toe-to-toe with what the Russians are doing. I'm not sure the Ukrainians should be going on any offensive operations, but they need equipment and material to stay on the defense to keep Russia from invading further and to keep Russia from trying to take over and accomplish their objectives. You know, both sides in that conflict still cannot use the military to get what they want to do, but they both think that they can. But if the Ukraine had the kind of resources, knowing full well that they would come from the United States, it's not money going to Ukraine. It's equipment and material being spent on U.S. defense contractors. So it's a big plus for the U.S. economy to do this. And I hope that NATO and the United States continues to support Ukraine as they say they will.
I wish the American Congress would free up the $60 billion in aid to the Ukrainians. Biden has given Ukraine just enough aid not to lose, but never enough aid to win. I'm very disappointed that the Republicans are preventing that aid from going through Congress to Ukraine. Ukraine isn't asking an allied nation to sacrifice a single soldier. It's fighting for its own national freedom, has every right to do that. And really, if the West cannot support Ukraine in this circumstance, they are short of ammunition, they're short of helicopters. God alone knows why we buried our helicopters in the sand instead of giving them to Ukraine to use. And mind you, if America doesn't give this aid, the Europeans, whose total economy is bigger than America's, they should supply Ukraine with everything it needs. They've had a big naval success, the Ukrainians, just lately with drones. Of course, we don't have any armed drones ourselves. But having said all that, Russia's power to endure is still very strong. This is going to grind on, I think, for a considerable tragic time yet.
Well, so the money that's actually going into Ukraine is going to our defense spend. And that's the one thing, the message we keep trying to get across, which is the money being spent both in Israel and the Ukraine is going into the industrial base in the United States. There's some good work done by the American Enterprise Institute that lays out that like 60 or 70% of all the money it actually is being spent to rebuild stocks in the United States. So we're sending older weapons to Ukraine and then replacing them with more modern weapons. The other thing we're doing is there's billions of dollars to increase the industrial capacity because it's clear we can't make enough bullets and weapons. And so what the Ukraine war has shown us and what the supplemental and the emergency funding has is money to improve the defense posture of the United States. It just so happens to be that the munitions are being used in Ukraine now, but they could easily be used anywhere else.
When we talk about a broader global conflict, China is often at the centre of these discussions. China has been positioning itself as a global superpower in recent history, with hopes of exerting that dominance. The question continually asked is, how far will China go?
I think China's in a strategic inflection point. So if you would have asked this question maybe 5 years ago, the conventional wisdom at the time was that China wanted to wait. It wanted to weaken America, but it was only getting stronger and that it could wait till 20, 30, 40, 50. And if you remember at the turn of the millennium back in 2000, this was supposed to be China's century. The growth of China was inevitable. But what we're seeing now is China's not growing, right? Their population is projected to shrink. They've got internal domestic problems. And so I think the calculus is changing for the Chinese leadership right now. Whereas before it was, create chaos around the world, but wait. It may be now that in many ways, they're not clearly they're not as weak as the Russians' economy is, but they may be learning lessons that their strength, if their strength is peaking now, then now may be the time for them to act rather than waiting. And so that's why some people believe that 2027, 28, 29 is really when China could be at its most aggressive posture. But it's a big game of global risk, if you will, right? And so the Chinese were very aggressive with the balloons, and the world that they're trying to create as much chaos around the world, right? They're in the news now for wanting to put another naval base in Africa. So what they want to do is put as many places in play to try to stretch the United States out. And then because the United States has said, really, we only want to do one war at a time. We're having trouble keeping our munition stocks loaded. And so I think what they're trying to do is stretch us out before they move.
It's a trying time for global security. Relationships between both traditional allies and emerging powers are truly being tested.